Carolina GOP Senator Tim Scott says he sees more agreement on banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants. On CBS Face the Nation, he says another key will be allowing police departments, not officers, to be held liable for rogue actions.
We do that with doctors, we do that with lawyers, we do that in most all of our industries. And if we do that in law enforcement, the employer will change the culture.
Some Democrats in Congress still say individual officers should be held accountable for the snap decisions they make that could cost lives. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
Meanwhile, mourners will gather Monday for the funeral of Andrew Brown Jr., a black man shot and killed by deputies in North Carolina. The invite-only service at noon in a church in Elizabeth City follows public viewings held Sunday. Reverend Al Sharpton will deliver the eulogy, and other speakers will include civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump. Brown was shot and killed on April 21st by deputies attempting to serve drug-related search and arrest warrants, sparking days of protests. Plus, gun violence in Chicago showing no signs of letting up.
Crime figures are going the wrong way in Chicago. The first 4 months of this year show that there have been 187 homicides. That's 31 more than the same period last year. Overall, 997 people have been shot since January 1st, 2021, compared to 718 in the first 4 months of 2020. In the month of April alone, 299 people were shot, compared with 225 last April. The Chicago PD says the rise in gun violence shows no signs of slowing down. This despite the number of guns police have confiscated. 3,600 have been seized so far this year, a 34% increase from a year ago. The one bright spot, carjackings are down more than 55%.
Fox's Karen McHugh. America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title with a real estate tip. A power of attorney can be a useful tool when a buyer or seller cannot be present to sign documents, such as a military member deployed overseas. To mitigate its fraudulent use, your escrow officer will contact the seller to make sure they know their property is being sold. When using a power of attorney, call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
.com.
Well, debates surrounding President Biden's infrastructure bill continue.
Republicans say they're concerned with more than the price tag and monetary policy. They argue that the new role the federal government would play would really be changed in an expanded bureaucracy. Still, though, some Republicans say they are interested in negotiating with the White House. There are some indications that some Republicans could be heading to the White House to meet with the president. We also are going to be getting an update from the president about where things stand with the pandemic, with vaccinations. That's going to be coming, Arthel, the same day the U.S. is set to impose new travel restrictions between the U.S. and India because of the surge in COVID cases there.
Fox's Mark Meredith reporting. And Apple faces a trial Monday that could upend its iron control over its App Store, which brings in billions of dollars each year while feeding more than 1.6 billion iPhones, iPads, and other devices. The case, which represents one of Apple's most serious legal threats in recent years, comes from Epic Games, maker of the popular video game Fortnite. Epic charges that Apple has transformed its once tiny digital storefront into an illegal monopoly that squeezes mobile games for a slice of their earnings. Apple denies that charge and seeks to depict Epic as a would-be freeloader on its App Store. Also new tonight, a Colorado woman dies after an apparent bear attack.
A nightmare come to life. A 39-year-old woman was found dead in southwestern Colorado after an apparent bear attack. The unidentified woman from Durango was believed to have gone walking with her dogs Friday near Trimble. According to her boyfriend, he returned home at about 8:30 p.m. and the dogs were outside, but the woman was missing. He started searching and found her an hour later and called 911. Colorado Parks and Wildlife officials say the female bear and 2 yearling cubs were euthanized. CPW's Southwest Region Manager says bear attacks are extremely rare and that this is a tragic event and a sad reminder that bears are wild and potentially dangerous. Sal Giangrasso, Fox News.
I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
The vaccine is officially here, and we aren't just talking about the COVID vaccine, but a financial vaccine at Bank Pacific. We may not be doctors, but we can help you with your financial health. Whether to take advantage of today's crazy low rates, or just a local bank that has your back. At Bank Pacific, we want to help make 2021 your best year yet. Because for 66 years, where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal Housing Lender, member FDIC.
Busy week? Mezcla Bistro in Tumon has you covered. Let us take the worries out of your dinner meal planning. Check out our daily specials or enjoy some of your local favorites. Plus, receive a free kids meal with each adult dinner entree purchase Monday through Thursday. Call 969-2652 for more information or make a reservation at the Guam Plaza Hotel in Tumon. And don't forget, Jack Larimer is live every Saturday night. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro, a true taste of Guam.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. The only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So here we are, 5 whole days of Tall Tales. It couldn't be any better than this, right, Jose? This is the high point of our week, where we've got a whole week of Tall Tales ahead of us. We somehow stumbled forward after last Friday, where we had 2 days of no Tall Tales, but we survived, and here we are. So let's go straight to Zemi Ikotny. And here's the Daily News. Delaying easing of quarantine restrictions, right decision. That's what the Daily News says. Wuhan virus is a public health and safety issue. Really? I'd have never figured that out in 100 years.
Study says.
The pandemic has touched every corner of this globe. How many corners does the globe have, Jose?
Even a flat earth doesn't have any corners, Bob.
Yeah. The pandemic has touched every corner of this globe. Even if a country or jurisdiction is not fighting Wuhan virus cases, it's trying its best to prevent or contain the pandemic on its shores and borders. This year has shown when a country, state, city, or island takes its fingers off the pulse of this pandemic, even for a moment, the consequences are dire for their people and for their economy. The governor's decision to delay the easing of quarantine restrictions for 2 weeks is the right decision. She is following science and the advisement of her public health team. I wonder if that's the same thing as the advice of her public health team. The advisement of her public health team. Yeah. Well, the only way we know if she's following the advisement of her public health team is by taking a census of how many horses have been killed recently. Because those who give advice that she doesn't like the sound of wind up with a horse's head on the foot of their bed. You folks from New Jersey. The evidence of clusters found 2 weeks ago might not seem like a significant issue to impact the island's CAR score, but as an incident, it deserves a thorough analysis and observation for at least the 2 weeks. The Wuhan virus area risk score is a measurement of the island's performance against different metrics. Now, I think I once upon a time knew how to figure it out. You take the number of tests administered the day before, multiply it by the number of vaccinations given 2 days earlier, divided by the square root of Dr. Cabrera's age, and then multiply it by the Julian date of the year, and that's the CAR scores. I remember. Yeah, right.
Don't forget to carry the one.
And you got to carry the one, yeah. Tie a string around your finger to carry the one, right? The governor targeted a CAR score of less than 2.5 as needed for the consideration of easing the island's quarantine restrictions. The island has consistently been below that target for the last 2 months. During the April 30 press conference, Governor Leanne Guerrero said she wanted the time to determine if the clusters had any further spread on island. Dr. Felix Cabrera added the time will be used to work out details with the government of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands for a possible travel arrangement. Cabrera said the new travel requirements will include proof of vaccinations verified with an immunization card, as well as a health authority certification. Both the governor's 2 weeks pause and Cabrera's plan for vaccination proof are on point with a careful and cautious approach to easing the island's quarantine. I'm not convinced. I think the governor wants to keep the quarantine on and keep renewing her magic powers as long as she can, because the magic powers feel so good. That's my cynical observation of the whole thing. Okay, the Post missed the mark today, too. Here's what the Post has to say. The recycled arguments from the feds on the ORDOT dump show bad faith. We hope the U.S. Supreme Court will act favorably close a long chapter in Guam's history by June. You guys need to listen to Tall Tales. If the Supreme Court rules in our favor, it doesn't remove anything. The appeal to the Supreme Court from the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia was an interlocutory appeal. That means it happened during the middle of the case. So if the Supreme Court rules in our favor, the case just goes back to the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. Before this long chapter would be closed, there has to actually be something that looks like a trial and some fact-finding, which hasn't happened, which I'll get to a little later on. So what's before the Supreme Court right now is a lawyer's dream. It's a very complicated case involving the beginning or the commencement of a statute of limitation. The District Court, as you were, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia has ruled that Guam missed the statute of limitation and therefore is unable to recover. Now, there's strong arguments on the other side, and this is, as I mentioned on numerous occasions, this is an issue that pens before other courts. This is not a case that's about Guam. This is a case that's about statutes of limitation. Hard as that may be for anybody who lives on Guam to understand. But this isn't one of those where, oh, the federal government's trying to screw Guam again. We better take this case. No matter how hard you try to paint it to look that way, that's not what this is. Going on, for decades, the ORDOT dump contributed to a number of health and environmental harms for the island. Unlined and uncapped, toxic waste seeped into nearby water sources, including the Lone Fit River, which made it much more difficult for Father Briard to bring little boys down there to swim. Unfortunately, it didn't stop him altogether, which would have been a much better result. Chemicals that had been thrown away, mixing with flammable trash and harsh sunlight, led to countless fires, many that resulted in neighboring families evacuated and put up in hotels until it was safe enough to return. The federal government was absolutely right to force the hand of our local leaders to do something, and boy, was it hard. The politically inconvenient debate of how Guam would pay for the massive project of closing and replacing the dump led to years of hand-wringing and empty promises. Well, go back and let's, where is that prism that I use that will filter out everything except political considerations? You look through that prism, it filters out morality, practicality, everything except what's good politics, which means what makes a politician popular to the point that he won't lose his seat. There are no good politics in spending money on a dump. There's nothing glamorous about a dump. There's no good photo op to be had by being out in front of the dump in front of a camera, cutting a ribbon, closing the dump or something like that. So it's not like building a school or building a hospital or something like that. There's no real legacy to be had for closing a dump. So our politicians just avoided it like the plague. They would have nothing to do with it. And the proper word here, the dump festered. Even a consent decree was not enough to compel lawmakers to act, even though we were sued by the Environmental Protection Agency. And instead of the matter going to trial, we entered into a stipulated judgment with them where we agreed, yeah, the dump's a mess. Yes, we got to clean it up. This is what needs to be done, etc. Even the consent decree was not enough to compel lawmakers to act. With a nickname like, quote, $1 Million Mondays, it would be hard to forget the judicial order that fined the local government weekly for failing to close the Orda dump and enact financing to build our current landfill in Luzon. So some smart guy with a pocket calculator figured we're better off spending money on the dump than spending money paying fines. Perhaps there are still lingering local issues in this regard. Recent financial studies suggest the Guam Solid Waste Authority needs to raise its rates to stay in the black. And there doesn't seem to be a rush from our leaders to address this need in a way that doesn't harm homeowners and renters. Same old story, no good politics in a dump. And that's why I was really disappointed when Ben Pangilinan hijacked Tom Atta's bill. When we were just getting the dump off the ground, Tom Atta's bill would have put the dump under the jurisdiction of the CCU, the Consolidated Commission on Utilities, which was established, had a track record, knew how to manage utilities, etc. Ben Pangilinan didn't want that. He didn't want to see that much power in those few hands. So he said, we got to have a standalone dump with its own board of directors and its own bureaucracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, none of the people that were put on the Solid Waste Authority knew anything at all about running a dump. It's not the kind of thing that you study at the University of Guam. There's no course called Dump Management 101. So the CCU knew how to handle regulated industries. It would have been so much better. In fact, it still would be so much better, but it's going to be hard to get there from where we are right now. So we're looking at a finance crisis now with the dump, and the Solid Waste Authority is saying we're going to have to raise the rates, and politically, of course, this will go over like the proverbial lead balloon. No one will want to get behind it. and there will be political mileage to make by saying, I'm not going to let the government charge you for your trash. A good campaign platform. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a rush from our leaders to address this need in a way that doesn't harm homeowners and renters, many of whom can't afford the current tipping fee for trash. But all the shortcomings and mistakes perpetrated by our own local government don't justify two key legal arguments presented by the Department of Justice to the nation's courts. Okay, now, I wonder if they've hired Josh Tenorio as a consultant here to help them evaluate legal arguments to see if they're justified. Josh can spot a bum rap a mile away. The local and federal governments have been engaged in a back and forth for several years, contradicting one another over whether the feds should pay their, now here we go, their fair share. Yeah, you got to get these loaded words in there. Their fair share of the mess they made in ORDOT. After all, the Navy operated the facility for decades, including for the disposal of post-war debris and containers that held hazardous materials. And this is one of those everybody knows. You know, no one can show you pictures or any kind of documentation, but you know, everybody knows the Navy dumped a lot of really bad stuff up there. And after all, well, we got a lot of after-alls here. The U.S. chose to sue Guam over the dump through the Clean Water Act. A federal law, Attorney General Levin Camacho and his office argue, was chosen because it insulated the military from liability. A long, complicated argument. And, of course, Levin Camacho was in office, but, you know, kind of the way the game is played, when you enter into a consent decree, you don't get a do-over because you should have made a better deal, or you should have made a deal with somebody else. Guam pursued the feds under another federal statute called the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, also known as CERCLA, which allows states and territories to sue and collect awards from private and public polluters. The District Court of Guam ruled in favor of the island. A Washington, D.C. appeals court overruled the initial decision, and now the case is before the 9 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, what happened here, and I've explained this before, CERCLA had like a 3-year statute, or excuse me, CERCLA had like a 6-year statute of limitations. Clean Water had a 3-year statute. We were past the 3 years. And Guam's argument is that it doesn't matter how you came across the liability, even if you agreed to the liability, you were still entitled to cost recovery under CERCLA, and therefore were timely. That's Guam's argument. To me, it sounds like a stretch. Yeah. One of the DOJ's arguments is that almost any corrective action on an environmental case triggers a CERCLA claim and its associated 4-year statute of limitations. Basically, the U.S. government says because Guam's consent decree was signed in 2004, the island had until 2008 to sue under CERCLA. About half of Guam's sister states and territories have rallied to our side. It makes sense. Yeah, because we do the same thing for them, thanks to Levin. Should the court rule in favor of the DOJ, all states will have their legal hands tied, forced to pursue environmental claims before they even know who exactly is responsible for the polluting. Yeah, a nice theory. The environmental litigation experts here at the Post. Jurisdictions would be required to come up with a number for damages before even knowing the scope of what has been harmed. No. And for Guam specifically, it means even though we are still on the hook through our consent decree for future liabilities, even under CERCLA, the U.S. will get away scot-free. Yeah. The current makeup of the Supreme Court might help Guam on this front. Trump-era appointees made the panel more conservative. Well, that may not bode well for... Now, here, I like this. This is really good. Well, that may not bode well for other territorial federal legal questions, such as Chamorro self-determination. That's a territorial federal legal question, one. And two, why? Our conservative liberals are more in tune with Chamorro. They're better people, so they're going to pay more attention to self-determination, right? A fight in the name of states' rights that's widely supported through a diverse and bipartisan group of states and territories could send a message that a majority of justices can get behind. I don't think that's the way it works, but we can only conjecture. Now, here we go. But the most outrageous statement during the recent oral arguments delivered on this case came when the U.S. government or EPA of the Treasury Department, the Justice Department's lawyer before the Supreme Court. And are they the same? I think it was probably someone from the Solicitor General's office in the Department of Justice who made this statement, not the U.S. government. I got a feeling most people in the U.S. government don't even know this is going on. Probably even the Attorney General is only vaguely aware of it. Okay, the most outrageous statement made during the recent oral arguments delivered on this case came when the U.S. government told the Supreme Court it didn't agree, quote, as a matter of fact, that the Navy contributed to the pollution of the Oro dump. Well, okay, where were we? We were at the Supreme Court. What kind of court is a Supreme Court? It's an appellate court. Do appellate courts make records? No. Where do the records come from? Where does a record on appeal come from? A trial court. A U.S. district court creates a record. Is there a record from the U.S. District Court here that as a matter of fact, the Navy contributed to the pollution of the Oro dump? No. In other words, there had to have been evidence presented before the court, testimony, cross-examination, etc., and a finding by a judge, a paper called Findings of Fact and Conclusions of Law that stated that the Navy contributed to the pollution of the Oro dump. Now, for the purposes of argument before the U.S. Supreme Court, lawyers use the phrase assuming arguendo, that is, assuming for the purposes of argument that this was the case. That's how you examine the law, on a stipulated factual record. But there isn't any factual record before the U.S. Supreme Court that the Navy contributed to the pollution of the Oro dump. Unfortunately, well, everybody knows that's what happened. Won't work before the Supreme Court. So I'm faulting you on your journalism here, Guam Daily Post. And then they make it even worse at the Post. It's similar to arguments made that despite all evidence to the contrary, the military still won't acknowledge the use of forever chemicals, including Agent Orange. Now, what evidence would that be? On the whole Agent Orange controversy, as I've been following it, no one has ever been able to find the remnants of Agent Orange on this island. The closest we come is a person named Foster, who was stationed on Guam, never went to Vietnam, and was able to prove to the satisfactory of medical examiners that his ailments were caused by Agent Orange. Okay, that's evidence. It's not conclusive evidence. It's not compelling evidence. And when you're talking about lawyers, lawyers' duty is to get a good result for their client. It's not a lawyer's duty to be really generous with his client's money. So if there are defenses available to a client, even in your way down deep in your heart, you think my client is a bad person, and it really would be right if he paid this guy. If there are defenses, legitimate defenses, the lawyer has a duty to advance those defenses on behalf of his client. And you don't try the lawyer based on the case. Now, I did make an exception here. When Vanessa Williams says it's impossible to separate our choice of whether and when to have children from every other choice in our lives. I think that's an outrageous statement. She didn't make it in court as part of an argument. She made it as an individual. This is her approach. This is her own private statement. Quite a difference. So when Justice Department lawyers perfect arguments that are available to them in this case where the public purse is at risk, it's their job to do the best job that they can. And if we're going to get, our skivvies all bunched up because the guy from the solicitor's office said that as a matter of fact, he didn't agree as a matter of fact that the Navy contributed to the pollution of the Orda dump, our thought process is never going to get us where we want to go. And I see cases of this all the time. It's similar to the arguments made that despite all evidence to the contrary, the military still won't acknowledge the use of forever chemicals, including Agent Orange. And here we go. Now we're lapsing into demagoguery. It's part of the playbook that led to archaeological sites on military construction projects being deemed insignificant, only to find out later the full importance and rarity of ancestral remains found. Now, who was doing the deeming there? I don't remember that. The only thing I remember is the SHPO's cover-up. That's been the major news event out there. And more demagoguery. It's part and parcel of the, quote, wink, wink, nudge, nudge approach of not confirming or denying the presence of nuclear weapons on Guam, even though the island hosts nuclear-capable ships, submarines, and aircraft. So because there are those nuclear-capable submarines, and because as a matter of national defense, there may be nuclear weapons here, and as a general rule, countries don't go around telling you where they're storing their valuable stuff. But because of that, we should win the Supreme Court case. This is classic demagoguery. And then, just because the tactic is recycled so often doesn't mean it isn't a waste of everyone's time. The U.S. government was absolutely wrong to try it in the highest court. That wasn't what the U.S. government tried. The facts of the case were not even before the court. This is a case dealing with not with the dump, not with Guam. It's dealing with two federal statutes and the statute of limitations. So to say, the U.S. government was absolutely to try it in the highest court. And maybe even for that reason alone, these 9 justices rule in favor of Guam. Boy, I don't know what happened to you guys over there at the Daily News. You usually write pretty good editorials. But this one is not going to get a blue star. It's going to get something else. How do you spell boo, Jose? Yeah.
B-O-O?
Here it is. Boo! Gosh, you guys, if you didn't have so much money in the bank already because of all your good editorials, I would feel really sad for you for putting out this piece of demagoguery. Yeah, okay, let's take a break and I'll come back to the Supreme Court for just a minute.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Half a day. This is Rocky Martinez, professional heavyweight MMA fighter. Nothing gets in my way when I go pro at Subway. Pack a punch with double the protein on any foot-long sub for just $2 more. For a limited time only. Subway. Eat fresh.
And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Yeah, so here we are, back again at the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, as a general principle, at least as long as I've been following it, that's over 40 years, doesn't make its decisions based on cheap shots. And that's exactly what you want here, Daily News. And the Supreme Court makes its decisions based on the law, not on facts, because the Supreme Court doesn't hear cases. It doesn't develop the facts. So if you think that, you know, that it all comes down to really 2 points. You didn't like what the solicitor, the Deputy Solicitor General said in oral argument, which was legitimate argument. And because the United States is not saying we keep nuclear weapons on Guam, some reason Guam should win at the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden millions of dollars will flow into the Treasury. No matter how many times I keep emphasizing this is not about the dump, it's not about Guam, it's about law, 2 federal statutes and statutes of limitations. And that's all that the Supreme Court is going to decide. I know you'd much prefer to see one of the justices say, you know, Guam really got screwed again, and it's time for the United States to stop screwing Guam. And in addition to giving them this case and $45 million, we've got a list of other things that we think the U.S. should do for them. And it's also the opposite of, or it also ties into the correction that I have to make from time to time when we see stuff like this, and that is that if you go to Washington, D.C., you can travel all over the city, and you will not see a government building anywhere in Washington. The typical government building with the Doric columns in front and the peak roof, and the name across the top of the building that says, the Screw Guam Bureau. And if you went inside, you'd find 100 bureaucrats in there pounding away on word processors, every one of them figuring out some way, some new way to screw Guam, how to keep the old ones alive. That isn't the case. The federal government is amorphous, huge, amorphous, unarticulated. So when you hear these things saying like, well, you know, the feds are doing this or that, you know, you have to narrow it down to a particularized, usually officer in a department before you really know what it is that you're talking about. And here what you're talking about is a deputy or assistant solicitor in the office of the Attorney General of the United States, the Justice Department, whose job it is to argue before the Supreme Court. He goes into the Supreme Court with one objective, to win, not to be fair, not to make the folks on Guam happy, not to say really kind things about Guam, not to criticize the Navy for screwing it. You know, I mean, sometimes it seems like we take one step forward and 2 steps back when it comes to understanding where we are, what it is that we're doing, and what we can do and what we can't do. Okay, time for a break, Jose? Yeah. Oh, that's right, I just took a break, didn't I? Let's go on to the card. And by the way, I got a a new way to spell boo when it talks to about the editorial from that newspaper. The way you spell boo is PDN. Yeah, they're improving, but boy, they got a long way to go. Okay, so I start out today on the card talking about the daily news and critical thinking. Does everyone out there, well, let me explain. Critical thinking means to take a particular issue and examine it from all sides with all the tools that you can, rejecting the obvious and looking for something perhaps not easily seen, partially concealed, complicated, etc. That's what critical thinking is. Your common sense tells you that the world is flat because you can walk outside and yes, it's flat, right? And if it weren't flat, if it were round like people say, we'd all fall off. So your common sense tells you the world is flat. But critical thinkers, all the way back to Copernicus, looked at the land, the stars, the heavens, etc., and did some critical thinking and said, no, the world is not flat. It's a spheroid. It's round. And they laid this all out. And, of course, the common sense folks made their lives miserable because everybody knows that the world is flat. We all know that. So that's what I mean when I say critical thinking. So this is the daily news against critical thinking. And then, let's see, we got to probably talk about the Chauvin verdict some more. And PDN also picked up with Protehe and Julian Uggan and chimes in for UNPO as to what a horrible place this is if you happen to be a Chamorro. And then in that respect, there is hope. Yeah, our favorite video star, Hope Cristobal, has a key role here. And you know how amiable and persuasive Hope Cristobal can be, how she has the ability to take complicated subjects and lay them out so clearly that even people who might tend to disagree with her can see the light. We've seen Hope in action, right? And then we've got Bavacqua, kind of along the same lines. Bavacqua disses Johnny Sablon to make one of his points. And that's probably as far as I'll get today. So let's start out with the PDN versus critical thinking. We had a Sunday forum today, and there was a submission by, on Sunday, there was a Sunday forum. Now, this is something that the Daily News, let me read this article from the Daily News, and I will supplement it myself. Pacific Daily News relaunches Sunday forum. And I used to do this all the time. I know you missed it. Well, I know I missed it. The Daily News had a long-standing tradition on Sundays where we would post a topic and ask readers to submit their opinions on those issues. We would then post the submissions the following Sunday with a new question. We would hold a roundtable and provide lunch. It was a good lunch, too. They had really good sandwiches, and I've seen as many as a dozen people there. And the questions always had an edge. There would be people on either side of that issue advancing well-thought-out, cogent arguments as to how they thought the issue should be resolved. Well, Dwayne George, the editorial editor of the paper, sat in on these, and he was kind of the moderator, kind of the judge. So those who really understood what was going on, went down there for two really good reasons. Obviously, the sandwiches. And the second was, the hope was that their advocacy would bring Dwayne George over to their side so that the editorial would adopt that position. And it was fun. It was like going to court without having to put a necktie on. It was really good, and they put out some really good stuff in the newspaper.
You're courting Dwayne George.
Say again?
You were courting Dwayne, George.
Exactly. Yeah, you were trying to figure out, well, how would, what approach would most likely appeal to Dwayne? So, and then people would submit their papers and they'd get published in the paper. And, if a victory was that Dwayne would go your way in the Daily News editorial and your letter would be the first one. Then you knew that you'd really rung the bell, and you could be proud of yourself until it was time to go down for more sandwiches. And I used to do that almost every time there was an interesting issue. So that's the way they used to do it. And then she'd say, then Rindrati goes on in this in this story here, you could tell when the topics were weak because there were always leftover sandwiches for the reporters. I think reporters appreciated those weeks. Sometimes, though, it would be difficult for people impacted by the issue to attend our forums because we'd hold them at lunchtime on a weekday. Yeah, well, if you can't make it, fine. Parking in Hagatnia was tough, but becomes even more challenging when you're trying to find parking in our area during the lunchtime. That is, if you can't walk. Now, if you could walk a block, you could probably find parking. But of course, if good parking meant the bumper of your car had to be touching the building you were visiting, well, there's no parking down there at all. Sometimes folks who were impacted by these issues couldn't get away from work at noon on a weekday, like teachers. Now, you didn't have to go to that meeting in order to submit. Some people never went to the meeting, but submitted. We're handling things a little differently in our new era now that we've become so mosquito. They cut out the lunches a couple of years ago. Yeah, so this is not anything new. We learned a few things this past year, should I say. Wuhan virus taught us a few things. One of these lessons was how virtual technology can be useful. I will not say that virtual experiences are better than face-to-face in all situations. I'll say they're never better. Virtually hugging your parents or having a drink with friends on Zoom is not fun, nor will ever be as good as doing that in person. But team meetings, some conferences, daily check-ins with staff, training, even schooling, if done well, are not so bad as far as virtual experiences go. Using that lesson, and not spending any more money on sandwiches, this is what we plan to do. 2 or 3 forums a month will be straightforward submission requests, such as our very first one today. We will simply post the topic and ask the community to respond. We will then publish the submissions next Sunday, when we will also write an editorial representing our views on that day. And that's what they did this time. At least once a month, maybe more if the issues warrant, we will hold a virtual roundtable. How do you distribute sandwiches over the internet? Yeah. You don't have to go. Really, I see exactly what you're saying here, Ree. We will invite folks who have expertise on the issue, as well as people who are impacted. During the roundtable, we will discuss, debate, argue, adjust our iPads, collaborate, and possibly solve the problems in that hour. One can only hope. These forums will be our Sunday roundtable. How's that for originality? Yeah, it's just like all the rest of it here. There's nothing original about it. I believe in telling it like it is. Whoa. So where do we find our Sunday topics? Well, for this first topic, it was a request from the coordinators of Guam Law Week. It's a great question, and one that I hope the community will find interesting. We also hope for more suggestions from the community for topics. Most of the time, the topics are timely about what's happening on our island or in our world today. Issues that affect us here or may affect us here. The topics don't have to be lofty or think tank worthy. They can be simple. The simpler, the better. Yeah, I found something I can agree with here. If you have a topic, suggestions, or questions, you can email voice@guampdn.com, or you can email me directly at rlimtiaco@guampdn.com. Whoa. My hope is that the community will find the return of our Sunday forums. They were only gone for maybe 4 or 5 months when they stopped doing it, if that long. Because there used to always be a box and the editorial page telling you what the new topic, and they just quit putting those in there. But they quit the lunches long before that. And they quit writing editorials long before that too, of course, which I think is the reason that Sunday Forum fell apart. Thank you to the Law Week coordinators for kicking us off with the return of Sunday Forum. Thank you all in advance for your brilliance, okay? Now, here's the topic. Or do I need, let me take a break. Let me break for the next break here.
All dads should own a Traeger. And this Father's Day, you can win a Traeger smoker grill for your dad and feast on flavorful wood-fire crafted meals. Cooked with a flip of a switch. Cook low and slow or high and fast with digital precision on your Traeger pellet grill. Purchase $35 or more in fuel at 76 Circle K and enter to win. Gas up today and join Circle K's Father's Day package giveaway. A Traeger smoker grill, a canopy, a cooler full of meat, and 2 cases of Bud or Bud Light are up for grabs only at Circle K. Conditions apply. Visit 76circlekguam.com.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Okay, so here we are. Now, this is the question that they ran, they solicited input for. And I think it's hilarious. Here it goes. This is what the bar submitted to them. I don't know who the people in the bar that organized this were, but I have a feeling that none of them play shortstop. You know why, Jose?
Why is that?
Left-handers can only play first base, pitcher, center field, and right field. They can't play shortstop and second base or third base, right? So I think this probably was...
That's physics.
Yeah, it's probably a first baseman, bunch of first basemen that wrote this one. Despite numerous court rulings that the 2020 presidential election was legitimate, I don't know of one. And I've been following this very closely. But here we go. You know, we're going to gaslight you and then ask you to write a critical opinion based on our gaslighting. Protesters disrupted the Electoral College when they stormed the Capitol on January 6th. How did this event challenge the role of the courts in ensuring the integrity of elections, preserving the political process, and upholding the rule of law and how we govern our society? There's a right answer to this question. There is a right answer. And everybody who submitted got the right answer. Now, I wrote one. When I saw the right answers, I had to do my own, and I sent it off this morning. And I don't know if they'll publish it or not because it's the wrong answer. You know, the right answer here is, oh, yeah, our democracy was under threat. You know, the president did this and
insurrection.
The big lie that he won and on and on and on and on. So here's their view. Now we're starting out about the courts, right? And we're talking about the rule of law and the role the courts had. So here's how they lead off. On January 6, pro-Trump battled police. Pro-Trump mob battled police. This is about the course now. Yeah. Broke into the U.S. Capitol and sent members of Congress fleeing during Electoral College vote counting to confirm Joe Biden won the election. 5 people were killed. Wrong. No one was killed, with one exception. And that was and we have to say this now, it was the white girl shot by the black police officer, which has caused riots in the streets. What some people refer to as the Main Street media can't stop talking about it. It's another example of a black, nobody said anything about it.
No
In fact, they haven't even identified the guy.
They refuse to.
They refuse to. But that's the only person that was killed in the incursion into the Capitol. So when they say 5 people were killed, including a U.S. Capitol police officer, credibility, gone. Because we know that the Capitol police officer died of a stroke. Anybody who can read knows that. Our citizens have a right to disagree and to protest, but they don't have a right to do what they did at the Capitol. That wasn't a protest. It was an abominable insurrection. Led by whom? Now, I every time I get the opportunity, I explain what really happened here. An unruly, unarmed, undisciplined, leaderless mob broke into the Capitol. That's what it was. It was not an insurrection. It wasn't a revolution, etc. The same that morning, Trump gave a speech, and he encouraged people to go to the Capitol to provide a cheering section or for encouragement for those members of the Congress who were going to use the legal process to protest the election. So when the mob broke into the Capitol and interrupted those protests, it was the last thing that Trump could have wanted. But it's the first thing that the Daily News seizes upon here. The riots that shocked the nation and the world came after numerous court rulings that the 2020 presidential election was legitimate. And once again, I haven't seen one. Over and over again, courts at all levels rejected claims of massive voter fraud, that the election was somehow stolen. Former President Donald Trump repeatedly insisted the election was stolen from him, notably at his, quote, Save America rally that began hours before the riots at the Ellipse, a park near the White House. The judicial branches settle disputes through a legal process, with the courts deciding what happened and what should be done about it. It's every citizen's responsibility to uphold the role of the courts, especially when it comes to matters of national importance, such as rulings regarding the presidential election. People may not agree with the decisions that are decided by the courts, but we must put our trust and faith in the process. Unless, as is the case here, other parts of government have jurisdiction to deal with the matter. And I always use this opportunity to point out that the most important the United States Supreme Court ever made in its entire history was that it did not have jurisdiction. When Mr. Marbury came before Chief Justice John Marshall and the Supremes and complained that Mr. Madison wouldn't deliver his writ of appointment, and I'll come back to this right after the halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM, and 104.3 HD3.
Border blaming. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. Leaders in Texas are continuing to speak out about a surge in southern border crossings that they say President Biden has created.
As the migrants, many of them children, continue to surge toward the U.S. through Mexico, Texas Governor Greg Abbott on Fox's Sunday Morning Futures alleged that cartels are using them to bring drugs into the country.
Every state is affected by the people who are coming across the border illegally, and that's exactly why all of us need to join together in this process to make sure that we are securing it.
President Biden told Congress last week that his administration will again examine root causes of the migration and that Vice President Harris will oversee that process. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
And chaos at a Wisconsin casino when a Saturday night shooting sent scores of people scrambling.
Police say the gunman opened fire at the Radisson restaurant at Oneida Casino near Green Bay and that it was not a random attack. This is Police Lieutenant Kevin Pollack.
It appears to be a targeted event, not a random shooting, targeting a specific victim who was not there, but he decided to still shoot some of the victims' friends or co-workers, it appears.
Police are looking into whether the gunman was a former employee of the restaurant. Governor Tony Evers issuing a statement saying he was devastated to hear about the shooting.
Fox's Sue Guzman. Meanwhile, the United States and Iran are in active talks over the release of prisoners, but Washington is denying a report from Iranian state-run television that deals had been struck. Prisoner swaps between the U.S. and Iran are not uncommon, and both countries in recent years have routinely sought the release of detainees, but any movement between the two countries is particularly sensitive as the Biden administration looks to restart nuclear talks. The issue burst into public view with the report in Iran of a deal for the Islamic Republic to release U.S. and British prisoners in exchange for receiving billions of dollars. America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Do you dread waiting in those long, inconvenient lines? That's why you won't find them at Bank Pacific. We're back to our pre-COVID Monday to Saturday hours with all of our branches open. You know, that where others put branches, we place roots thing. And if you don't want to come to the bank, we have MyCloud Banking through which you can go to the bank on any of your devices, including through our new cool mobile banking platform with a remote capture so you can deposit checks from anywhere. Offline, online, no line. Bank Pacific. Where others put branches, we place roots and rooting for you. Member FDIC.
A Southwest flight attendant has filed a lawsuit claiming the airline is responsible for her husband's COVID-related death. Fox's Jeff Manasso reports.
Southwest flight attendant Carol Madden accuses the carrier of failing to protect staff from coronavirus during mandatory training last summer, saying that she and other attendees contracted the virus that led to her husband Bill's illness and later death. The suit also alleges that Southwest failed to publicize it, to perform contact tracing, and to alert potentially affected employees. The airline saying while it's incredibly sympathetic to those who've lost loved ones due to the virus, that blame on the company is misplaced. It's seeking to dismiss the case. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
And a runoff for a U.S. House seat in Texas is set. Republicans Susan Wright and Jake Elzy advanced from a crowded field of 23 candidates in Texas's 6th congressional district. Democrat Jonna Lynn Sanchez was narrowly locked out of the runoff. She said in a statement Sunday that her campaign came up short after trailing Elzy by fewer than 360 votes, with nearly all votes counted. Wright is the widow of former Congressman Ron Wright, who died in February after being diagnosed with COVID-19. Plus, are nurses exhausted? Well, a new survey of nurses working in critical care say the COVID-19 pandemic has left them tired and stressed. Fox's Evan Brown has this story.
Nurses, especially those working in ICUs and taking care of patients with severe COVID-19, could just be worn out from the work. A survey from Ohio State University's Nursing College says that while critical care nursing was already a stressful job, more nurses are even more stressed now. 2 out of 5 report they are depressed. More than half say they're suffering from anxiety, and 6 out of 10 believe their own health to be poor. The survey is being published in the American Journal of Critical Care. Evan Brown, Fox News.
I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
Busy week? Mescla Bistro on Tumon has you covered. Let us take the worries out of your dinner meal planning. Check out our daily specials or enjoy some of your local favorites. Plus, receive a free kids meal with each adult dinner entree purchase Monday through Thursday. Call 969-2652 for more information or make a reservation at the Guam Plaza Hotel in Tumon. And don't forget, Jack Larimer is live every Saturday night. Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro, a true taste of Guam.
Listen to The Point. Any speaker, anytime. Check us out on your FM radio at 93.3, 104.3 HD3, thepoint.gu, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and tune in. And announcing radio.com. Download the app and hear The Point. Get the latest news, sports, entertainment, and more.
On demand.
Your phone is digital. Your life is digital. And we are too. 93.3, The Point.
Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumon. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Off a day. This is Rocky Martinez, professional heavyweight MMA fighter. Nothing gets in my way when I go pro at Subway. Pack a punch with double the protein on any foot-long sub for just $2 more. For a limited time only. Subway. Eat fresh.
So here we are, second half of Tall Tales after another great halftime show. And before we broke, I was talking about courts and the most extremely important question that courts deal with, which is jurisdiction, their own jurisdiction. And I make the point here that those 177 members of Congress, 8 senators and the rest members of the House, that went to the went to the Congress to protest the election or the electoral vote count, were doing exactly what the law allows for. That was the rule of law that they were pursuing. And that if the court doesn't have jurisdiction, then it has no business deciding a particular case. And concomitantly, if the Congress does have jurisdiction, then that's what it ought to be doing. So to say that, as this editorial says, that over and over again, courts at all levels rejected claims of massive voter fraud, it's just not correct. Again, I don't remember one court saying that. I've seen decisions where a court said that the plaintiff didn't have standing, where the matter was moot, where the matter wasn't ripe, other things like that, what we call threshold factors. But there was never a full-blown trial where the judge or judge and jury said there was no, and the word fraud is not necessary part of this argument, because fraud is a particular meaning and is a harder proof than just election irregularity or even election cheating. So I make the argument that this editorial and this whole question is an exercise in gaslighting. And I'm pointing out that the most important decision that the United States Supreme Court ever made was to find that it did not have jurisdiction in the case. At the very beginning of the country, Mr. Marbury brought a petition before the Chief Justice John Marshall and the Supremes, asking for a writ of mandate compelling James Madison to deliver a writ of appointment to him, appointing him a municipal judge in the District of Columbia, according to a statute enacted by Congress. And the Supreme Court, at the direction of John Marshall, said, we don't have the authority to enter that kind of a writ of mandate. We are an appellate court. This petition does not properly invoke our jurisdiction. Case, no jurisdiction, case dismissed. And that's where the whole system of judicial review came from. So courts, in a sense, a court cannot not decide a case. In that case, by not deciding the case, the Marshall Court made the most important decision in the history of the Supreme Court. I would just cite one more example of when a court should not have asserted jurisdiction, and that is in 2000 after the 2000 election, where I have pointed out on more than one occasion when people criticized George Bush, saying he never even got a majority of the votes. You'll recall that he won on electoral votes, but not on popular votes. Well, he never even got a majority of the votes. My answer, yes, he did. He won that election with a majority, 5-4. The Supreme Court should have declined jurisdiction on that case and should have let it be settled at the U.S. Congress in accordance with the Electoral Count Act and the 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution. But they got into it in themselves and really brought a lot of disgrace on the court and really harmed their credibility to a great extent. I have a story, a personal story that I like to tell here, not personally about me, but about Sandra Day O'Connor, who at the time was the swing vote on the court. And I've been critical of Sandra before because Sandra was the most powerful woman in the United States during that period of time because there were 4 liberals and 4 conservatives on the court. And so whichever way Sandy went is the way the court went. So those who went before the Supreme Court spent most of their time trying to figure out how to brief the cases for Sandy. And if you looked at all of her decisions, the decisions in which she was a swing vote, you couldn't find an ideological thread that tied them all together. You couldn't say, well, she's a textualist or a living, whatever. She didn't really have a theory. Her theory was, I want to continue being the most powerful woman in the United States. Therefore, no matter what, I'll be in the middle. So the story that circulates is that after the 2000 election, when it was the matter was tied up in the courts before Bush and Gore, and they were still counting the votes, Sandy was at a restaurant somewhere, and the vote count was announced, and at that time Gore was slightly ahead, and Sandy said to one of her friends, "Oh, shucks, now I can't retire."
Yikes.
Yeah. Democrat president, Republican justice, can't retire. Now I can't retire. I've got to stay on the court. And the rest of the story is that Sandy's husband was suffering the pangs of Alzheimer's and was about to be or was institutionalized. So to her credit, she wanted to get off the court so she could care for her husband, spend more time with her husband. Well, and along the lines of Ti Mamago si Diyos, her husband was in a home for old folks, and he fell in love with the other people in the home, and he dumped Sandra.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyhow, it's a really interesting, scandalous story. But the point I want to make is that the fact that a case went before the court and the court didn't say that Donald Trump was the winner doesn't mean that all of his claims were on and on and on and on. And it doesn't mean that what the 177 members of Congress were doing wasn't the right thing to do. But obviously there's a right answer here. And the right answer is, if you didn't know what the right answer was, you looked at the answer sheet put out by the Daily News, and it reads, on January 6th, a pro-Trump mob battle. That's it. That's the answer. So you are to, if you want to get a good grade on this paper class, you are to use this as a mechanism to bash Trump, that Trump lost in every single court in the country, and that Trump caused a insurrection at the at the Capitol building, and that the right guy won. That's the right answer here. So
it's
that's
refreshing, to see under new ownership, the editorial page went from national propaganda to local propaganda.
Yeah. So I put this on the card as a PDN versus critical thinking. The question is not designed so that you could stay within the boundary of the question and express a view other than the right answer. So it's kind of like, sometimes I sit down with friends and we're talking, they want to talk about the show, so I explain things that happen in the show, and we go on and on and on for a while. And then I think, geez, I'm talking about the show an awful lot, so I say, that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. What did you think of my last show? And that's kind of the way, how big of a masshole do you think Donald Trump is, right? Yeah, not very good. Khalil, you got to do something here. This is not going to go well if this is what the Sunday Forum is going to be like. If it's going to be the lefty position that Renrati likes, and then she gives you a chance to show how much you agree with that particular, all in the name of critical thinking, it's not going to work very well. Okay, next item on the card is Hope Cristobal versus Guam. And this is another Daily News masterpiece. This ran, well, I think it's going to run tomorrow. Ran in the email edition. Now, here's the headline. Time for 7. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got phone calls here, don't I? Yeah. I got a couple people in the green room. I've got Dr. Ron McNinch, and on location at the drive-thru at McDonald's, none other than Drive-Thru Jack. So you're not at a drive-thru, are you, Ron?
Hey, happy day, Senator. Happy day, Guam. Yeah, I'm just over at a coffee shop. I just want to call in and say,
sometimes we've had Jack call in from a drive-through, and it added a whole new dimension to the show because I had Jack, and then the person who was taking his order all on the show at one time, and in a sense, the person taking the order, I think, had a better response to my questions than Jack did.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sure. I just was going to mention just a couple of quick things. I've got to say that Sandra Day O'Connor, she was the real deal in a lot of ways. Nobody would give her a job when she was right out of law school. I think she went to Stanford. When she was at Stanford, she was studying with her kids crawling around on the floor in the kitchen. So, really neat backstory to her. And by the way, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was encouraged constantly by the Obama administration to retire so they could fill her seat with an ultra-liberal, and she consistently refused to. And so that's a little more of court trivia. But getting back to the insurrection, just the Congress immediately using the language of insurrection after the Capitol stuff that happened on January 6th, it was they used that language very, very deliberately. And the thing I wanted to mention is when the Kavanaugh hearings were going on, people were crawling all over the U.S. Capitol. I mean, it was just, if you take a look at the media stories of what was going on in the halls of the U.S. Capitol during the Kavanaugh hearings, it wasn't all that much different than things that were going on January 6th. Only, I think that the crowd was probably less kind of in a waved kind of form. The other thing I was going to mention really quickly is I think, and I rarely criticize President Trump, but I do have a little criticism of him, and that is I believe he should have used the Insurrection Act against those Antifa people in Seattle and in Portland and in other places. I think he should have immediately put down, those were insurrections. And in fact, that idiot mayor in Oregon who now wants the National Guard to come running to the rescue, after months and months and months of just off-the-handle violence and other bad behavior. I read somewhere that the number of murders has increased tenfold in the city of Portland since these Antifa people started running around. It went from like 2 to 20 in a very short space of time. And so, I think that in general, I think we have examples of true insurrection and true rioting in terms of letting the public know, regardless of where they're at, whether they're in the U.S. Capitol or anywhere else, that you do not riot in the United States, that we have law and order. This is America. We have police. We have the National Guard, and we're going to use them if people want to use violence against the community and against the public. I think that was, and I think it was, from what I understand, Trump's Secretary of Defense, the one guy who later turned on Trump like crazy, that really was blocking constantly the use of the Insurrection Act, if I recall. I forgot his name now, but I really think that President Trump probably made a tactical error by not putting down and quelling those bad behaviors in a lot of other places, and it almost became like a norm in many places, including the Capitol, because they did the same thing at the Capitol when he cleared the streets in the Capitol. They pitched a bit about, oh, how dare you move violent protesters, or however they termed it. It was just incredible. I think that I wish I would have known about this forum piece. I would have came out probably with a bit of a different opinion, because what I'm hearing from you, sir, is it sounds like there's a narrative that people wanted to write according to what the narrative was saying, rather than what the true theme of the purpose of having the forum was.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The right answer was show us how well you understand the narrative.
Right. Right. And I think that these things are far more complex. Now, I'm not saying, I have no idea right now exactly what happened on January 6th in the Capitol, but I do know quite a number of very, very open and low-level politicians like Nancy Pelosi tried to make the absolute most out of it. And it became a very, very deliberate narrative used constantly for the last several months.
The use of the word insurrection is something that I harp about almost on a daily basis, that the left will try to control your thoughts by controlling your words. It's just like George Orwell said, don't let them take your words away from you. And that there was a riot, certainly there was an incursion, but it wasn't even close to an insurrection. But they make so much out of that word, and here's the Daily News, insurrection.
Wow, it's incredible. I do hope, and I really, really hope this. I don't care about the politics or anything else, but America learns the lesson that you don't let these off-the-handle crowds, I don't care why they're off the handle, and I don't care why they're tearing up a community, that we don't put up with it. And that police and the National Guard or whatever other forces need to be used are used to restore order. because with order we can have courts. You know, those protesters in Portland, including that idiot mayor, they were trying to break into the courthouse, the federal courthouse.
Yeah.
When he claimed that he was being tear gassed and stuff, that's because him and his idiot friends were trying to break into the courthouse. It was incredible. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth, sir.
Well, it's worth about a nickel, Ron. Thank you very much for calling.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and then we go, I guess time for a seventh inning stretch, huh? Yeah, let's go to the seventh inning stretch, and we'll pick up Jack at the nearest drive-through to Wrigley Field.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
All dads should own a Traeger. And this Father's Day, you can win a Traeger smoker grill for your dad and feast on flavorful wood-fire crafted meals. Cooked with a flip of a switch. Cook low and slow or high and fast with digital precision on your Traeger pellet grill. Purchase $35 or more in fuel at 76 Circle K and enter to win. Gas up today and join Circle K's Father's Day package giveaway. A Traeger smoker grill, a canopy, a cooler full of meat, and 2 cases of Bud or Bud Light are up for grabs only at Circle K. Conditions apply. Visit 76CircleKGuam.com.
So here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago, the world's most beautiful ballpark, packed with Cub fans. I never got around to asking drive-through Jack. Jack, are you a Cub fan?
Am I a Cubs fan? Chicago?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was during the Derby between Sosa and McGuire. So that was back in the steroid area.
All right.
But I wanted to comment on the editorial here, and I think you know what the term "loaded question" means, right?
Of course, yeah.
And I think this is exactly what this was a loaded question. And I think you're correct to say that the premise of the question was wrong. So if the premise of the question is wrong, why even answer it? In fact, the strongest argument about problem solving and solutions and looking for discussion, for healthy discussion, is try to eliminate as much adjectives that you can when you're asking the question. You know, you're trying to get to the point, you're trying to find solutions. But once you broadcast in your question where you want them to go, or you want to lead them to the solution, then, you know, you just have to walk away from the table. And I think when I read what Miss Renati, is that her name?
Renati,
yeah. About this editorial, and you read it, what the question was, you already knew where they were going. You already knew what the answer what they were looking for. And the problem is that if you even attempted to answer that question, you accepted the premises of the question, and the premise of the question was wrong, totally wrong, like you said. And it was also a loaded question. So I think the most proper way, I mean, we're talking about bar association, we're talking about judicial stuff going on. One question they could have asked, and it would have feel in everybody's wheelhouse, is Maxine Waters, First Amendment or jury tampering.
Yeah.
So you give an opportunity, a choice, or, you know, here's the one position, here's another. That's not what this question did. That's not what this question did. It was looking for certain answers. It was looking for it. It led you to what they wanted. They led you to what the narrative. You spoke about the narrative. They didn't, like Ron mentioned. If anything, they could have compared. Hey, compare what happened at the nation's capital to what happened to every capital during the so-called demonstrations, or what happened in Portland, or what happened to Seattle. But no, that's not what they did. They already came to the decision what happened was wrong, was against the law, and they asked it. They framed it in that question, saying that forget about the facts, forget. No, here's what it is. This is what happened. The color of the sun is not really light. It's really a hue of darkness, and it's a shadow. But no, that's not what they did. They purposely loaded this question. So that's why I never read the PDN anymore. I don't even bother with the form. It used to be it was a straight away form. Hey, here's this position. This is position. Please submit your answers, or submit your thoughts on this. But no, that's not what this was. And to open up your first column like you did with this, it's really a shame to how low the bar is for discussion for solutions that involve people, social problems, or anything, any kind of solution. If you're already going to frame a question from a position that you already wrote the answer to 2 weeks prior, I mean, it's not even worth your time, anybody's time, anybody's time. And it's a shame. It was a loaded question. It started from a false premise, and then that's how you're supposed to answer it. And you just spent a lot of time, discussing the question as it being true. I know you pointed out in the beginning, but that's an important point. If the premise of the question is false, don't even bother answering. Point out that the premise is false.
Well,
then you always attack a position from its strongest leg. And the strongest leg, when these people start to look for solutions that have to do with social problems with people, they always start from a false premise, and it just muddies the water. And there's the cops are always bad. I want you, when you have time, to look up this discussion from a professor in Cypress College. I don't know if it hit your radar, but there was a Zoom classroom discussion at Cypress College. It just happened this past couple of days, in which a professor asked a student why the student didn't think that that police were bad. What was his problem? What he didn't understand about the 1890 or whatever 1860 project that police were there to assure that slavery went through. And so if you look at that, it's less than 1 or 2 minutes long. And the audacity of this professor to state all premises that police are bad and that you shouldn't call the police and we should abolish the police. And this poor student trying to say that, what are you talking about? You have a few bad things.
So Jack, back to the local scene, back to the Daily News. So long as we have a company known as the Pacific Daily News and Gaslighting Company putting out things for people to read, the one saving grace here is that we have tall tales, correct?
Unfortunately, Bob, it's not enough, because what sticks to people's minds is not what is discussed. Even though we are Chamorros and we are traditionally an oral community and it sticks in our heads, it's embedded in our genes, what counts is what's printed. And so far, we're losing the battle on all platforms.
Well, we'll see if we can take tall tales and to the print media, right? Maybe that's the solution. Anyhow, Jack, thanks a lot for chiming in. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right.
Bob, did you suggest that Guam PDM should be part of the Consolidated Commission?
Yeah, right. It should be regulated by the CCU. Yeah, they're
Sounds
a public,
about right.
Yeah, utility supplying natural gas for the gas lights. Okay, next item on the card, Hope Cristobal versus Guam. I almost got started on this before I went to the phones. This is another effort on the part of the Daily News, and here's the headline. Now, we know that the reporter who writes the story doesn't write the headline, it's somebody else, but there has to be some discipline in headline writing. You can't just put any old thing up there unless you want people to read it and take it seriously. And here's what it says. Report, Chamorros denied equal rights. And it talks about a report from UNPO. I read most of the report, and the report does not say that Chamorros are denied equal rights. That's not what it said.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You know, and let's just examine that question. Are Chamorros denied equal rights? What right do I, as a non-Chamorro, have that a Chamorro doesn't have? None. You know, a person who is of Chamorro ancestry has the same exact rights as everybody else who is living under the American flag. As a matter of fact, I once upon a time wrote a letter to the Post pointing out that, you know, that somebody used the phrase second-class citizen, which is, to me, an aggravation. We don't have any second-class citizens in the United States. A citizen is a citizen is a citizen. But I sat down and wrote a letter, and I took them up on it. And I said, I called the letter Confessions of a Third-Class Citizen. And this is why I said that. The Internal Revenue Code of the United States does not apply to Guam. That's why we have a territorial income tax. And it's the mirror image of the Internal Revenue Code, but the money all stays here. So that's the only tax for which we have a mirror image here in Guam. None of the death taxes that the United States levies on people apply here. If you die if you are, well, let me put it this way. There is a death tax on rather large estates, or maybe 10 million or something. It's not something I'm going to have to worry about this week. But the United States does levy taxes on estates of dead people. That's part of the tax structure. For anyone who was born in any one of the 50 states. But if you were born here, there's no federal death tax on any assets that you own here or anywhere else in the world, anywhere but in the 50 states. So a natural-born citizen of Guam is more equal than I am because he has that advantage. If I had that kind of money and I die here, the U.S. national government is going to assert that tax on me. But it wouldn't if I had been born here, as far as my assets that weren't located in the 50 states.
Depending on where you were born.
Exactly. And I'll come back and explain why that distinction.
I was born in California. This is really hard.
Well, that's the worst possible place to be born. You're lucky to survive, Jose. And then second example, I figure I'm a third-class citizen because people who are born in the Northern Marianas have that same kind of deal. And if they are people of Northern Marianas descent, meaning Chamorro or Carolinian, they can own fee simple title to real property in the Northern Marianas.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So far.
Yeah, they can. I can't. You can't. So that's an even higher class of citizen than someone born here. So Northern Marianas is 1, Guam is 2, 50 states is 3. So I'm a third-class citizen. If we want to start talking about classes. And then I threw in there that besides that, I'm not the class of citizen that can vote here on the self-determination question. And at the time, well, I'm still not. I'm not eligible for any of the leaseholds that are available only to certain people. So I'm way down the list. As far as equal rights, I'm way, way short of the mark. But this is titled, Chamorros Denied Equal Rights. And it goes, a report published in April. Now, why did Anamita wait until today, the 3rd of May, to run this story based on a report published in April? No explanation. And the report states the issues of a Chamorro plebiscite and the military buildup on Guam, quote, present perhaps the most alarming denial of the rights of self-determination of an indigenous population in the Americas. So I guess we got moved.
I was going to say.
Are we in North America or South America?
We're in whatever America.
Yeah. The Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization released the report last month. They released it last month, and it was published, all right, in April.
Front page.
Yeah, which details this situation in response to a request for input on self-determination of indigenous peoples from the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights.
China is not a member.
In references the May 20 decision by the United States Supreme Court to not review, it references the May 2020 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to not review Guam's plebiscite appeal. And you know, this whole thing, they must have got somebody from a ghostwriter from the Daily News to help them with this. Of course, this is the Daily News, isn't it? Guam law calls for a non-binding plebiscite during which native inhabitants would state whether they prefer independence, statehood, or free association with the United States. But the federal courts have ruled voting eligibility for the plebiscite is illegally race-based and violates constitutional protections. The Supreme Court in May 2020 said it wouldn't grant Guam's request to review the case, which was brought to the courts by Jigo residents Dave Davis. As it stands, the federal courts have prohibited Guam from holding the plebiscite. And here's a quote from the report. The U.S. court's decision under the guise of equality effectively enshrines constitutional inequality in the USA. The indigenous Chamorro people, while technically citizens of the USA, unilaterally granted, have long been denied equal rights to participate in the U.S. federal system. Everybody else living on the American flag can do it, but if you're Chamorro, no. I can vote in presidential, I can vote for, I can do the whole, but you can't, Jose, sorry, because you're Chamorro.
But I was born in California.
It doesn't matter. That's what this report says.
This report took away my equal rights.
Yeah. They now must live with that inequality while not being allowed a remedial right to be directly consulted on their vision for the future of the island, the report states. So I wonder how that would work. And once again, I wonder why the UNPO and these people that beat this drum don't really criticize the United States colonialist government here, because everybody running the government is a colonizer. There are no indigenous people in this government at all, none at all. Fact is, there's only one colonizer in the whole lash-up, Clint.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
That's right. He's not indigenous.
He's not an indigenous Chamorro, as though there are indigenous Chamorros and non-indigenous Chamorros. Yeah. A massive realignment of U.S. military forces in the Asia-Pacific region will bring about 5,000 Marines from Okinawa and elsewhere to Guam this decade, along with an additional 1,500 dependents. This involves the building out of a new base, Camp Blas, in Dedido, and a live fire training range complex at Retidian. The military presence in Guam has long had a major impact on basic indigenous rights, including through the expropriation and development of indigenous lands. Now, I'm not I'm not aware of any expropriation and condemnation. This is like insurrection. You know, you take a really powerful word that doesn't apply, but it's got more emotional appeal. Expropriation and development of indigenous lands. So, and the pollution of the water and land resources central to indigenous life. Doesn't hurt anybody else. A primary cause of the military buildup in Guam, a non-self-governing territory under the UN Charter, was a successful campaign by indigenous Okinawans of the U.S. military presence on their island. Just wrong. Just dead wrong. There are, believe it or not, Japanese and Okinawans don't see themselves as the same people. As a matter of fact, Okinawans, I think, have their own definition of critical race theory. They think that Japanese have been unkind to them over the past years. But I got a feeling that most people in Okinawa, if you said, "Who are the indigenous people of Okinawa?" What? Yeah. And the reason that the Marines are moving out of Okinawa has nothing to do with indigenous people at all. It is a matter of Okinawa, because Okinawa entertains, you know, the Japanese consider a blessing that the United States defends them. So a lot of the money that Japan, a lot of the of expenses that Japan would have to shoulder if it weren't, the United States shoulders for them. And the Japanese think this is a really good deal. And so do the Okinawans. But the Okinawans point out that about 2/3 of American troops in Japan are stationed on Okinawa, which is a pretty small island. And that's their major gripe, that we should keep the U.S. troops in Japan, spread them around a little bit. And then you get the Communist Party of Okinawa involved, and they've got their own axe to grind, and a little bit of residual dissatisfaction caused by the fact that the United States occupied Okinawa until 1972. I was in occupied Okinawa, and it was run by Americans. Drove on the right-hand side of the road. You used American currency, etc. Basic American law was applicable. There was a government of the Ryukyu Islands populated by people from Okinawa, but it was an American government until 1972, when the United States and Japan agreed that Okinawa would revert back to Japanese sovereignty. Well, nobody wants to live in an occupied country, and there's still some residual bitterness from that. But it's not because of the indigenous people in Okinawa that the Marines are relocating.
There is lots of other factors.
Exactly. So this article goes on to say, thus, in order to allay the risks of their activities presented to one indigenous population, the U.S. military decided to offload that risk to an indigenous population over which they have more direct control. The report states, following the U.S. occupation of Guam in 1898, the Chamorros have experienced acute and systemic injustices amidst their political disenfranchisement. Yeah, like I mentioned a little earlier, it's nothing but colonizers that run the government here on Guam. The government of Guam became a member of the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization in August 2020, according to the report. They slid one by us, Jose.
I don't remember voting for that.
I don't either. And this is another Anamita car production, so it kind of tells you something there. Now, there was a link to this UNPO report, and I have the report here. Information on alleged victim and practitioners. Okay, let's break for the home stretch.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon is back with all your mezcla favorites, like oxtail kadu, Kahlua pig and cabbage, and Chef Peter's style black stew frittata. Mezcla is ready to welcome back everyone with great service in a safe and friendly environment. Come on down and visit Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon, located on the first floor lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Open for lunch from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and for dinner from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Okay, so here we are, Churchill Downs on Saturday. I couldn't make it to Churchill Downs on Saturday. I understand that the organizers of the Kentucky Derby had a large wreath made of roses that they wanted to present to me as a representative of Tall Tales. But with all this quarantine stuff, I just couldn't work it into my schedule. Okay, next we go to this petition to that international organization. What was it called? It has a really fancy name.
UNPO?
That's, yeah, but that's not who the petition is directed to. Well, anyhow, this is a petition to that international outfit. And hagiography. Hagiography means the study of people for sainthood. So I think we're going to embark on a little hagiography here when I read this is a petition. I got a feeling I know who put the petition together, and I won't tell you his name, but his initials are Ogun. Yeah. Here it goes. Name of petitioner, Hope Alvarez Cristobal. She's the one that petitioned this international organization. Hope Alvarez Cristobal is an indigenous Chamorro from the island of Guam and a descendant of the native people. I guess that's where the Alvarez comes from, huh? Of the native people who first inhabited the Mariana Islands 4,000 years ago, affectionately referred to as Auntie or Sina. Hope, Mrs. Alvarez Cristobal, has been advocating for the rights of the indigenous people of Guam, Chamorro self-determination, and decolonization over the course of several decades. I forgot my Kleenex box again, Jose. She is a descendant of the native people who survived Spanish colonial rule, a violent Japanese occupation during World War II, and the continued colonial subjugation of her people by the United States. Raised in the aftermath of the nearly 500 years of uninterrupted colonization, Her life experience as a Chamorro woman is riddled with the injustices that many Chamorros have come to accept as a part of life in Guam. Her family consistently fought for the recognition and dignified treatment of their people, and as an advocate for the right of self-determination, Sina Hope is well versed in the impact that this historical injustice has had on the Chamorro people. Mrs. Alvarez Cristobal has been intimately involved in advocating for decolonization and has a rich history of engagement with the indigenous community, the local and federal government, Paul Zerzan, and even internationally with the United Nations. As a founding member of the Organization for People's Indigenous Rights, Sina Hope has tirelessly engaged the United Nations with written and oral testimony, advocating for the rights of the indigenous Chamorro of Guam. As a member of OPIR, Auntie Hope was among the first Chamorro to engage the United Nations on Chamorro self-determination, paving the way for deliberate engagement between the government of Guam and the UN. Yeah. Well, this lady has really done a lot, hasn't she? Since the early 1980s, Sina Hope has pushed the United Nations to become more directly involved in Guam's decolonization in accordance with UN Charter and UN Resolutions 1514 and 1541. She spoke courageously alongside other notable figures in Guam's history, including Ron Rivera, Ron Tehan, former Congressman Robert Underwood, and J.D. Crutch, not to mention Gus Sandal. As an educator in the 1980s to the 90s, Mrs. Alvarez Cristobal worked to preserve and perpetuate the Chamorro language, pushing back against the impact of deliberate efforts by the federal government to ban the native language in public after World War II. So she was doing this in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. As a result of such policies enforced by the U.S. naval government in Guam, the Chamorro language is considered on the verge of extinction. Sina Hope was elected senator in the 23rd Guam legislature, where she authored the law that created the Commission on Decolonization and the implementation of Chamorro self-determination. When she ran for re-election, she didn't draw flies. And then she tried again the election before this last one. Same result. Somehow, as wonderful and great as she is, she can't seem to get elected by the Chamorros. Probably it's the effects of colonialism that causes this. During her time at the Guam legislature, Sina Hope also authored legislation recognizing Guam's 200-mile exclusive economic zone and served as a staunch advocate for indigenous rights in local, federal, and international forums. Her unwavering commitment to the rights of the Chamorro people undoubtedly stem from the harsh reality of her shared experience as a colonial subject. Sina Hope is also an advocate for sustainable practices and remains an active farmer and educator. She works with local farmers to help revitalize Guam's agricultural community. Yeah, you know, I guess I'm just so fortunate that I've actually talked to Hope Cristobal. And I had a little bit better time of it than Paul Zerzan did, I have to say.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, I guess, this story is so important, the Hope Cristobal story, that I can't leave it here. I've got to come back to it tomorrow.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD.
The push for infrastructure spending. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. President Biden is trying to push his ambitious spending plans through Congress.
President Biden is calling on Congress to spend trillions of dollars, raise taxes, and do both fairly fast. This week, the president, he's going to start making his case to the public about why so much money is needed. Now, these proposals are broken up a little bit. One, they're going to be focused on education, childcare, boosting social spending programs. Then there's the other $2.3 trillion effort to repair infrastructure, something that both parties say they are interested in working on. White House officials insist there is room here for a bipartisan deal. But some conservatives argue these proposed new programs could make too many Americans dependent on the government.
Fox's Mark Meredith reporting. And world powers are still trying to figure out how the U.S. can re-enter the Iran nuclear deal.
We know Iran's chief nuclear negotiator said this weekend his country actually expects sanctions to be lifted on most banks, oil companies, and individuals. This is based on progress at ongoing talks in Vienna, Austria, where physical agreements are reportedly being drafted to return to some of the framework we saw in the confines of that 2015 agreement. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan described the meetings last week as, quote, in an unclear place. This all since Iran is still unwilling to meet directly with the American delegation. Now, the Biden administration continues to downplay claims of talks progressing rapidly as onlookers are looking at a May 21st deadline, at which time a monitoring agreement between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency expires.
Fox's Trey Yingst reporting. Meanwhile, Colorado's governor has extended a statewide mask mandate for another 30 days, but loosened face covering requirements for groups who are vaccinated against COVID-19. People gathering inside in groups of 10 or more are no longer required to wear masks if at least 80% of the group is vaccinated. The order states people must show proof of vaccination. Residents are still required to wear masks at schools, public government facilities, prisons, and healthcare centers. America is listening to Fox News.